Imagine this: you come home after a long, exhausting day, just wanting to relax, and someone has stolen your peace, literally, by brazenly parking in your spot. Not just any spot, but your dedicated, assigned parking space. What would you do? How far would you go to reclaim what's rightfully yours? But before we dive into this wild tale of parking wars and escalating revenge, do me a favor: like, subscribe, and comment for more incredible Reddit stories like this one. Your engagement helps us bring more compelling narratives to light. Our story today comes from a frustrated Redditor, living in an apartment complex, just trying to navigate the daily grind like many of us. This Redditor, our narrator, had a designated parking spot, not just any spot, but a tandem parking spot. For those unfamiliar, that means two spaces, one behind the other, reserved exclusively for a single unit. It's convenient if you have two cars or need the extra space, but it also means if someone parks in the inner spot, they effectively trap the entire space, rendering both unusable for you. One fateful day, our op came home to find the unthinkable: a car, completely unknown to them, was boldly parked in the inner spot of their tandem space. Picture the immediate wave of annoyance, the frustration bubbling up after a long day. Who does that? Who has the audacity to just commandeer someone else's property, especially in such an inconvenient way? Their first thought, naturally, was to call a tow truck. This is standard procedure for unauthorized parking, right? But here's where the first twist in the knife appeared. The tow company informed them they couldn't just hook it up and go, they needed explicit authorization from the complex manager. And guess what day it was? Sunday. The manager's office was closed, no one was available, and that crucial authorization was impossible to get. A dead end. The rules, in this case, were actually protecting the very person breaking them, leaving our op in an impossible bind. So, what do you do when you can't get the intruder towed, and your own parking space is rendered completely unusable? The op was left with a choice: either park somewhere else, completely outside their designated space and risk being towed themselves, or take matters into their own hands. They opted for the latter. Seeing no other viable option, and likely feeling a growing sense of righteous indignation, they carefully, deliberately, parked their own car in the outer spot, effectively blocking the offending vehicle in. It was a clear, albeit risky, message: you parked in my space, now you're not going anywhere. It felt justified at the time, a proportionate response to an act of blatant disrespect and disregard for private property. They went to bed that night, perhaps with a slight smirk of satisfaction, perhaps with a nod of anxiety, wondering what the morning would bring. Would the owner of the blocked car realize their mistake? Would they find a polite note? Or would things escalate? Parking disputes, as we all know, can bring out the absolute worst in people. And this, my friends, was just the beginning of a truly dramatic escalation. The next morning, the op headed out, ready to start their workday, probably anticipating an awkward confrontation, a sheepish apology, or at worst, a slightly annoyed conversation with the car owner. But what they found instead was far, far worse. As they approached their vehicle, a cold dread crept over them. Their eyes landed on a horrific sight: their car, their personal property, was heavily, irrevocably keyed. Not just a little scratch, but an act of pure, unadulterated malice, etched deeply across the paintwork. It wasn't just metal and paint, it was a violation. Each cruel line felt like a personal attack, a deliberate act of vengeance for daring to assert their rights. The sickening glint of silver where paint should be, the jagged edges of a key dragged with incredible force, it was a scene of utter destruction, a stark testament to someone's uncontrolled fury. Imagine that moment. The sinking feeling in your stomach, the rush of anger, the sheer disbelief. This wasn't just a parking dispute anymore, this was a deliberate, criminal act of vandalism, a vengeful attack on someone's personal property because they dared to enforce their own rights. All because they blocked a car that shouldn't have been there in the first place. The cost of such damage is astronomical, often running into thousands of dollars for a full repaint. Despite the shock and fury, the op tried to keep a cool head, or at least, tried to follow the protocol. They reported the vandalism to the complex manager. But even then, they met resistance. The manager, perhaps wanting to avoid further drama or liability for the complex, remarkably advised against taking further action, and still didn't want to tow the illegally parked car. It was as if their inconvenience, their significant property damage, was less important than the potential stress of the person who committed the initial trespass and now, the vandalism. But the op wasn't going to let this stand. This wasn't just about a parking spot anymore, it was about blatant disrespect and criminal damage. So, against the manager's advice, they called the police. This was a criminal act, pure and simple, and it needed to be treated as such. And when the police arrived, things finally started to move in the right direction. The officers, understanding the severity of the situation and the clear evidence of a crime, made it clear to the property manager that the illegally parked car had to be towed. Finally, some justice, some accountability. The car was removed, and a police report was filed, initiating charges for the vandalism. Days later, the dust hadn't settled. The op was called into a meeting. And who was there? The complex manager, of course, likely hoping to mitigate the situation. But also, a neighbor the op had never even met. And then, the true culprit, the friend of that neighbor, the owner of the car that had been illegally parked and subsequently towed, and undoubtedly, the person responsible for keying the op's car. The air in that meeting room was thick with tension, not remorse. The op wasn't greeted with apologies, but with a palpable sense of anger directed at them. The complex manager, perhaps trying to smooth things over, seemed to facilitate the onslaught rather than mediate. And then, the neighbor and her friend, the car owner, launched their offensive. The op was berated, verbally attacked, for towing the car, and even worse, for pressing criminal charges for the vandalism. Imagine being the victim, having your property damaged, and then being made to feel like you are the aggressor, the unreasonable one in the room. The sheer audacity. The defense for the vandal? Apparently, the op had caused this person undeserving stress. Undeserving stress? What about the stress of finding your car keyed? The financial burden of thousands of dollars in repairs? The invasion of your personal space? The argument was that the op should have gone out, tried to find this unknown person, and asked them to move their car, instead of resorting to what they called the nuclear option of blocking them in and then calling the police. It was a classic, infuriating case of blaming the victim, twisting the narrative to absolve the true wrongdoer of any responsibility. The op, sitting there, taking this torrent of criticism, couldn't help but wonder, am I crazy here? Am I really the asshole? Was I out of line for protecting my property and reporting a crime? Or was I simply trying to assert my right to my own property and seeking justice for a malicious act? It's a moment of profound doubt, planted by others, despite the clear and undeniable facts of the situation. This story really makes you question where the line is drawn. When does protecting your property become an overreaction? When does demanding accountability become causing undeserving stress? The op was the victim of an initial parking violation, then a significant act of vandalism. They followed procedures where possible, and when those failed, they took necessary steps to secure their spot, and later, to report a crime. Is it ever okay to key someone's car, no matter how frustrated you are? Should the victim of a crime ever be made to feel like the villain? This Redditor asked, am I the asshole? What do you think? Were they justified in every single step they took, or could they have handled it differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more wild tales from Reddit, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.